Okay, well, we'll get started now. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm Katie Fleming. I'm the Community Engagement Director at Friends of the San Juans. We worked with the Madrona Institute and the Citizens Climate Lobby to bring this lecture, education, work, I don't know, we'll see, just this information to you tonight. And I'm really excited to hear, you know, we've got some new pushes here as far as climate change policy goes for the federal level, for the state level, for the local level. The new things to get engaged with and some old things to get engaged with, but I'm glad to see you here ready to learn about it tonight and hopefully get involved yourselves. I want to thank Ryan from the Conservation District, who is broadcasting this over YouTube, a live feed, so there are people who aren't in this room who are watching it as well right now, so thank you for that, Ryan. And before, I think that's all I need to tell you. Again, thank you for being here. I want to introduce our featured speaker, Gwen Hanson. She is coming to us from the Citizens Climate Lobby, but is also a full-time family practice doctor. So the fact that she spends her extra time doing this, I think, says a whole lot about who you are, but also the importance of this issue. So thank you for doing that. I want to just read a few things here too to make sure I tell you everything I need to tell you about her. But she is a graduate of Cornell University and the University of South Florida College of Medicine. And again, she's coming up from Bellevue. But she, you know, in her bio, this is what she states. She believes that Americans want to protect air, waterways, and the earth for each other and for wildlife. She believes that by building relationships, we can enact a carbon fee to decrease the pollutants in our atmosphere, along with a dividend that will provide a universal basic income. So again, I think that's probably the basis for why you do what you do. And again, thank you for that. And I'm excited to hear more, and I think we all are. So Gwen, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
I want to thank Ryan too. It's a very elaborate setup and quite amazing. So. I'd like to thank all of you for coming tonight. It's a beautiful night outside here in San Juan Island, and I appreciate you being here, certainly. And I appreciate the groups that helped set this up. I'd also like to shout a thank you to David Fouch and Scott Finley, who are setting up the group on Lopez Island, who are also watching this as we are tonight. Special thank you to Gretchen Allison, who couldn't be here because she's in Costa Rica too, because she introduced me to the wonderful people like Katie Fleming and Ryan and Sarah Severn and Ron Z, finally, who I got to meet just now. So you've already heard this part, but I do want to tell you a bit of a story about myself. So back in 2006, I was getting onto an airplane to take a direct flight from London back to Seattle, 9-hour flight. And I don't know how you guys feel about flights, but I actually love getting on an airplane because I just love being able to sit still for a while and just focus on one or two things. So I love to read, watch movies, and I was just really excited that I could have some relaxation time on the airplane. Unfortunately, I brought the wrong periodical. 2006, I was blissfully unaware of anything climate related, and I had to pick up this green issue of Vanity Fair. It was devastating to me. The issue was talking about problems like parched farmland, where we wouldn't be able to have enough food. Cities underwater, no worries, just the major cities. The solutions they proposed were things like thinner water bottles, changing light bulbs. I thought, there's a little disconnect here. And I started to freak out a little too because nobody was talking about the problem. My friends weren't talking about it. Nobody was doing anything. The government wasn't doing anything. I was pretty scared. And all this was before I watched Al Gore's movie, An Inconvenient Truth. When I got home, I had a brilliant idea. My two oldest daughters were just starting to drive. So I told them and the whole family that we would all decide that we would walk or bike everywhere if it's less than a mile from the house. Great idea, right? The girls are adorable, but they hated the idea. And they responded by proceeding to drive to Safeway, 0.3 miles from our house, basically every time they wanted to do a little shopping. So that was pretty upsetting. And I decided I would have to make a change by myself. So I stopped driving. I stopped driving anywhere. I bike or bus or walk everywhere I go, except for here. We drove an electric car here. I also committed to a plant-based diet. So this is a picture of me. My favorite thing on weekends is to jump on my bike and ride about 10 to 15 miles to play chamber music with my friends in Bellevue. And this picture is pretty accurate, except that it's never sunny like that. It's almost always raining, usually a cold rain, as you guys know better than I do. So today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about climate change, science, and impacts. And I also want to introduce you to Citizens Climate Lobby. I want to tell you about our policy, our culture, and our methods. And at the end of the talk, I also want to talk to you about how we can all work together, the San Juan Islands and Citizens Climate Lobby, to solve the problems that you guys are seeing here locally and the problems that we're facing all over the globe. So what is Citizens Climate Lobby? I love the mission to create the political will for climate solutions by enabling individual breakthroughs in personal and political power. So we have 90,000 members. We could have a lot more than that, but we are not the kind of click and play organization that a lot of them are. We are a transformational organization, and what that means is that when you become a volunteer at Citizens Climate Lobby, you learn how to advocate for your planet. You learn how to talk to your congressman, write letters to the editor that get accepted, that sort of thing. So it's very exciting. And just as an example, like I do not give PowerPoint talks, yet here I am. So that's one example. Our overall goal is a livable planet. So you guys came to a climate talk. You knew that this part was inevitable. We're going to have this nasty picture of burning coal, gas, and oil. And we all know that that produces carbon dioxide, which is making our global warming that was natural and allowed us to have nice 60-degree days. It's making our temperature a lot hotter than it should be. We've been burning a lot of these fossil fuels. And if you look at this graph, it's easy to really start to get very alarmed about the future because you can see that the curve of the carbon dioxide emissions, which is on the vertical axis, is going up at an extremely fast rate. It's continuing to climb. But we are long past the time of worrying about the future, though, because the problems with climate change are already here today. Unfortunately, in an October 2017 Lancet study, they determined that pollution is already killing 9 million people per year. And notice I'm saying pollution, not climate change. So it's really interesting that the pollution which causes climate change in itself is already hurting us, even if it wasn't causing climate change. And when you look at these millions of people that are dying prematurely, severely impacted among those people, a lot of children and a lot of elderly people. And there is no safe level of small particulate pollution. So if there's a car in your neighborhood, it's making somebody's lungs worse, especially the lungs of children and older people. You guys know a lot more about what's happening here on the islands than I do, but I did look it up on the internet, and I found that Washington State Department of Health has decided to update which beaches are unsafe for fishing on a daily basis. So things are changing fast around here. When I looked on April 19th, several beaches were closed to fishing on Stewart and Cypress Islands. But luckily, everything was okay on this island. So before I mentioned how many people pollution kills, climate change itself is also harming people all over the world already. Smaller numbers, thank goodness. But climate change is killing about 500,000 people per year. And the most dramatic example of that was the European heat wave of 2003, in which almost 70,000 people perished due to the heat. But even in the greater Seattle area, we see that when there's a hotter day or a heat spell, there are more admissions in the hospital and emergency room visits and hospital admissions and deaths from things that we don't normally attribute to climate change, things like heart attacks and strokes. But it's because those common ailments that we all fight against, those occur more commonly when the temperatures rise, especially when it fails to cool off at night. So to me, this is the scariest slide in the deck. On the vertical axis, you can see global emissions, and it's measured in tons of carbon dioxide per year. On the horizontal axis is the scale of time. And the orange, the sort of brown line, is the line of what's going to happen if we continue to let our government and our corporations dictate business as usual. Keep on going. We all have good lives. Let's just keep it going. That's what's going to happen if we're going to have 4.5 degrees Celsius of temperature rise by 2100, possibly worse. Why is that bad? Most experts agree that that degree of warming is incompatible with civilization as we know it. The red line is showing what will happen if people meet their intended nationally determined contributions. So that means if the countries that have signed on to the Paris Agreement go ahead and meet the voluntary limitations that they put on their own countries, then we will decrease warming and it will only go to 3.5 degrees Celsius. Unfortunately, that's still not a good scenario for a civilization. The green line is a better scenario, but still we will lose low-lying islands and we will still have effects seen in all sectors of our civilization. So things like education, water, food, economy, jobs, health, all of those will still be impacted at 2.0 degrees Celsius. And how do we know? They're all being impacted right now. And right now we're at 1.1 degrees Celsius warming. So we definitely need to be at the green line or hopefully a little bit below the green line. Ideally, we could limit the warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Oh, before I go, stop. Okay, so this is a blank slide. What I'm going to show you now is a movie. It's a really cool movie. And I want to tell you right up front, the guy in the movie is my brother-in-law, my husband's brother. And he's had a series that's called It's Okay to Be Smart on digitalstudios.org. You've heard of it. Some people have heard of it. And it's fantastic if you're interested in any component of science. But he just started a brand new one called Hot Mess, and it debuted on Thursday, April 19th, just about a couple weeks ago. So I want to show you the first episode of his show, and I hope you enjoy it.
Have you ever wondered why you live on a beautiful blue watery planet and not a frozen ball of ice? That's exactly what the French scientist Joseph Fourier wondered almost 200 years ago. He calculated Earth was far enough away from the sun that it should be much colder, way colder, like below freezing instead of warm and comfortable. Fourier noted that while sunlight can shine through the gas in Earth's atmosphere to warm the surface, the heat our planet gives off doesn't pass so easily back into space. Just like how sunlight warms up a greenhouse. Fourier's simple observation came to be known as the greenhouse effect and gave birth to a new way of thinking about the world, the science of Earth's climate. In the 200 years since, we've made a lot of progress in figuring out how Earth's climate works, how it's changing, and why. But why have we had such a hard time acting on that knowledge? At the start, there was just a lot we didn't know. But the next big eureka moment came in the 1850s. Scientists Eunice Foote and John Tyndall figured out that adding more of certain types of gas, like carbon dioxide, to Earth's atmosphere would make it trap more heat. And in the 1890s, Swedish scientist Svante Arrhenius made the first mathematical predictions of how much that extra carbon dioxide would heat the Earth. But most people simply hadn't heard about any of this. And if they had, they might not have believed it, since few people even imagined that humans could affect something as big as the climate. But Earth's human population soon took a steep upward turn, partly because fossil fuels were transforming the way we lived. A British engineer named Guy Callender suspected this might have a bigger impact than people thought. In 1938, he looked at atmospheric and temperature data from around the world in more detail than anyone ever had. He showed for the first time that not only was burning fossil fuels increasing the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, but Earth's average temperature was rising in response, just like Arrhenius said it would. A growing number of scientists realized we were performing an unprecedented experiment with an uncertain outcome. They eventually gave it a name: global warming. More measurements of the atmosphere continue to tell the same story. We were adding carbon dioxide to Earth's insulating layer. That warmed the air, but we discovered that it was also changing the amount of ice at the poles, the patterns of rainfall on land, and even the chemistry of the ocean itself. So we gave it a new name: climate change. What's more, by analyzing ancient air bubbles trapped in ice millennia ago, we realized that CO2 had been the main control knob on Earth's climate for hundreds of thousands of years. Looking at the history, it's clear by the second half of the 20th century, we understood the main causes of climate change, and they were surprisingly simple. We knew what was happening and why, so why didn't we do anything about it then? Could it be that we just didn't want to know? It's not like scientists were keeping this knowledge to themselves. In 1959, physicist Edward Teller stood in front of every major oil executive and cautioned that by burning fossil fuels, we were changing Earth's climate. In 1905, scientists warned U.S. President Lyndon Johnson about risks from future climate change. But it took until 1992 for us to sign a global treaty calling for lower emissions, and we're still struggling to act today. That's partly because climate change is a big, complicated problem, maybe the biggest humanity's ever faced. The modern world was built on and still depends on fossil fuel energy, at least for now. So adapting to and stopping climate change will require revolutionizing much of how we live. That would be really tough to do, and it's difficult to even get our heads around what it might look like. Which brings us to another big reason we find it difficult to act. Our brains are just bad at processing a problem like climate change. I mean, the gas that causes it is literally invisible, and the changes play out over decades across the entire planet. When we do think about it, it can easily feel far away or even overwhelming. We know what's happening, and we've known it for a long time. Climate change will affect us all, no matter where we are or how we live. Solving it can't wait for tomorrow, and we can't wait for other people to solve it for us. And that's why we're making this show, to talk about how the climate is changing and how we can make Earth cool again. Let's get started cleaning up this hot mess.
So yeah, if you want to see more episodes, you can find it on PBS Digital Studios Hot Mess. So, all right. So we have a big problem, and we do know how to solve it. Basically, everybody who's studied this problem knows that if you want less pollution, you need to make it more expensive. And that brings me to the solution of Citizens Climate Lobby. So the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, has stated that they do not think there's any way that we can stay under 2 degrees Celsius unless we put a price on carbon, and that the price on carbon needs to rise significantly after it starts. And so at Citizens Climate Lobby, we have come up with just such a solution. It starts with a price on carbon, and this is at the national level. $15 per ton of carbon dioxide or carbon dioxide equivalent will be assessed on all fossil fuels at the point of entry. So that means it'll be at the mine or at the port or wherever it comes into the country, or the well, of course. All of the revenues, except for a very small administrative fee, is then returned to American families in equal shares. Every adult gets the same amount, and every child gets half the amount, up to 2 children per family. We think this is really important. We have a lot of forces that are going towards lots of inequality and worsening inequality. This is one of the things that will help it go the other direction. The other aspect of our policy is we do have a border adjustment, and the border adjustment is basically to keep things fair. So if a country who has no carbon tax tries to sell us cheap products, they're going to have to pay our carbon tax at the border. And by the same token, if our manufacturers are trying to sell to a country that doesn't have a carbon tax, they're going to get a rebate so that they're not hurt. They don't take a hit at the border. Policies like this this policy has proven success in British Columbia, right near here. I think you guys are even north of part of it, from what I saw on the map. In British Columbia, they started this carbon tax in 2008 at a modest price of $10, and they increased the price for $5 every year until it got to $30. This was a very successful policy. The economy in British Columbia did just as well as the economy in the other provinces. The tax was popular. Emissions did go down. GDP went up. Jobs went up. In fact, the policy was so popular that they have just started to raise the price again. And effective April 1st, the price went up to $35 per ton of carbon dioxide. And it will continue to go up by $10 per year until 2021 when it gets to $50. So I want to tell you a little bit more about the benefits of carbon fee and dividend as we draw it out in Citizens Climate Lobby. So we contracted with REMI, this Regional Economic Modeling Institute, and they are a nonpartisan, non-biased organization that does lots of congressional reports and international corporation reports. They're very well thought of. And we asked them to study what our policy would do to the country in these 4 areas: emissions, economy, health, and incomes. And all the data is divided up by region. So they found that under carbon fee and dividend, emissions will go down. Now, I think everybody in this room has probably had the experience of walking on a really busy street with lots of cars and then sort of slipping onto a trail where you're in a forest somewhere, and all of a sudden that air feels better and you can breathe better. When these emissions go down, we're going to notice it. It's going to be lovely. It's going to be really great. Within 20 years, emissions will go down 50%. These drops in emissions are enough to put us on that green line that I showed you earlier and keep us at 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius of warming. So it's powerful enough to do the job.
Question for you.
Yes?
Is that assuming global adoption or is that US only?
This is assuming US only. The nice thing about that border adjustment that I mentioned is that if the other countries are noticing that they have to pay a carbon tax to the United States government, then they will say, hey, we should get our own carbon tax that we could pay to our government. So that can lead to a domino effect. And that's one reason that people like Ted Halstead in the Climate Leadership Council and other Republicans, like Republican groups on college campuses, are very supportive of it because it's a free market solution and it will kind of compel other countries to copy us. So, excellent question.
So that 50% reduction is global or is that US reduction?
That would be our emissions reductions, but because the carbon tax would tend to ripple, we would see it in other places as well.
Thank you.
Lives would be saved, and the nice thing about saving lives is that for every life you save, you're improving a whole bunch of other lives too. So this would be a really great thing. I mean, as a doctor, I see tons of people that have a prolonged cough after cold, or postnasal drip, or sinus conditions, or outbreaks of their asthma. And all of those things, they will still exist, but they will decrease if we can lower our emissions. So that will be lovely. This is exciting too. The fee and dividend would create more jobs, and there's several reasons for this. One reason is that it's like a stimulus. People will be getting more, they'll have more money in their wallet, and then they'll want to go out and spend that, so it'll stimulate the regular service economy. The other reason is that clean energy jobs, such as retrofitting houses and buildings, building public transportation, those create a lot of jobs. In fact, the solar industry already employs more people than the coal industry. And it's going to get better still. So what would this mean to families? The household dividend would probably amount to $288 per month after 10 years of our plan in action. That's for a family of 4. And by 20 years, it'll be $396 per month. And I don't know how this sounds to you, but There are, as I said before, a lot of forces working towards inequality. For example, if you look at the 25 years leading up to 2012, only 1% of the total wealth gain went to the bottom 90% of households. 1% of the total wealth gain went to the bottom 90% of households. And by contrast, 42% of the wealth gain went to the top 0.1%. So there are continuing forces that are making inequality get worse every year as we sit here. And so having a basic universal income is going to be helpful for low-income families. It's going to be one thing pushing us in the other direction. Also, the policy is progressive in general too, even without, because what happens is that when you're very, very wealthy, you buy more things and more services, and that consumes more carbon. So they would experience a higher price rise than people that have less income are going to experience less of a price raise. But the dividend's going to be equal to all families. So proportionately, poorer families will do well, lower income people. This is a summary of all the results of the policy. So, has anybody here ever heard of the book Drawdown by Paul Hawken? Yay! Okay, so this is my all-time favorite book. And so for those of you who haven't heard of it, Drawdown is a book in which Paul Hawken, he didn't write the book, but he got a bunch of scientists together to study what would be the 100 best ways that we can not only lower emissions, but also decrease the carbon dioxide in our atmosphere down from where it is now at 410 parts per million, all the way down to under 350 parts per million. And the very cool thing is he found 80 solutions that are already happening as we sit here that are doing just that. And he found 20 more solutions that are like coming attractions, that are future solutions that he thought had a lot of potential. So Paul Hawken, he loves Citizens Climate Plan, the fee and dividend, simply because it's one of the best ways to accelerate all the solutions in his book. The nice thing about the solutions is that we would want them even if they weren't helping us fight global warming. Like, can you imagine if all office buildings had windows that could open, plants in them, and natural sunlight? I mean, that's not going to put anybody out, I don't think. And if we have more educated women so that they could decide, take their family planning into their own hands, I think, again, we would most agree that that's going to bring positive benefits. Other things, another big contributor that I know Ryan's passionate about is decreasing food waste. And, you know, like, it's not, everybody's going to be happier if we can, like, use all those last ingredients and have the restaurant taking all the food that they don't use at the end of the night and giving it to people that need that food. So decreasing food waste is another solution that's going to be good. And then in the end, it's going to help decrease emissions a whole bunch too, so you really can't go wrong. So I want to share a cartoon that I like with you. So here you have the lecturer waxing on and on about all the benefits of climate policy, energy independence, preserve rainforests, sustainability, green jobs. And then there's the heckler in the back of the room. Are you kidding me? What if it's a big hoax and we do all these great, creative, better world for nothing? So who is Citizens Climate Lobby? This is a list of our core values. And I'm not going to stand here and tell you that Citizens Climate Lobby will replace a good counselor. However, I'd like you to look at these characteristics here. When I looked at it, I thought, okay, I do very well on relationships, even though my kids drive short distances. I do well in the integrity department, but I could use a little help on these other ones: focus, optimism, and nonpartisan. And I'm here to tell you, Citizens Climate Lobby has helped me do a lot better on those other three characteristics, and it can help you too. So I do want to tell you a little bit about our methodology, but in order to do that, I'm going to share a story about one volunteer. Now, don't get me wrong, if I could tell you, if I had all day, I could tell you lots of stories about lots and lots of volunteers. There's a lot of wonderful people in the group. But I'm going to tell you about our best volunteer. His name is Jay Butera. And I think you'll agree that he's done a lot when I get done with the story. So Jay Butera is a guy from Pennsylvania. And he's a climate advocate. He joined Citizens Climate Lobby, but working after hours and on weekends like I do, that wasn't enough for Jay. He decided to make it a full-time everything. He lives and breathes Citizens Climate Lobby. So he looked around him and he thought, okay, there's one state in the union that has the worst effects from climate change and the least action. Does anybody want to venture a guess which state he was thinking of? Florida. You got it. It's Florida. He picked Florida. So he had never been to Florida. Keep that in mind. So he decided he was going to go to Washington, D.C. and Florida and just try to get some action going. He didn't even know which Starbucks were good, which bars to go to. He knew nothing. But he was hanging out in Washington, D.C. and Florida. So while he was in Washington, D.C., he was in the lunch line one day, and he just asked the guy next to him what to order, and the guy recommended some Thai salad or something. And they got to talking. And they started talking about climate change, and like most times when anybody brings up that subject, everybody's like, oh my God, I don't want to hear about doom and gloom, please don't do this to me. But Jay Butera is not like that. He embodies Citizens Climate Lobby, right? So he's got these things going on. So he starts telling this guy about the solution that we have and how it could really work and how things could be a lot better. Turns out the guy he was talking to was Ted Deutsch. So he's a Democratic lawmaker from Florida. So that was a good start. After they got to be friends, they decided they wanted to do something, and they decided they wanted to start a bipartisan climate solution caucus in the United States House of Representatives. To make it bipartisan, they would not allow any Democrat to join unless they brought a Republican with them. So, of course, task number 2 was find a Republican. So they started looking around, finding somebody who would talk to them, listen to them. They found Carlos Curbelo. He's a Republican lawmaker in Florida. And here's a picture of Jay Butera. And then at the table is Ted Deutsch and Carlos Curbelo together, sitting at the head of the table. For 2.5 years, Jay was working on getting Carlos Curbelo to join. But Carlos didn't want to put his career on the line just to join some caucus that didn't even have any members in it. So Jay had to use all of these principles that we talked about. He started talking to the constituents of Carlos Curbelo, and he had them come in and make presentations and join meetings with Carlos. After 2.5 years of intense lobbying, Carlos said yes. The Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus was born with Carlos Curbelo and Ted Deutsch at the helm. They were the beginnings. So all the rest of us volunteers who just write letters to the editor that aren't always accepted, we were very excited about this progress that Jay had made. And this timing here was February of 2016 when the caucus started. So, and then the membership grew. And by November of 2016, we had, I believe, 18 members. Now, after the election, unfortunately, some of those people didn't come back. They were voted out or they didn't run for re-election. So then we dropped down to, I think it was about 13 members at that point. So we were kind of worried. A lot of stuff going on in Washington. We were nervous. But there was something about the new administration that kind of spurred a lot of people to action, and a lot of people wanted to distinguish themselves and say that climate change was real. So it turns out that interest in this Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus got even more intense after the election. And the caucus grew a lot faster after that initial part. This slide looks impressive, but I have to tell you, we are completely unable to keep the slides up to date. We now have 74 members of the caucus. So we've come a long way, and they are talking. And I did spend one afternoon just listening to podcasts of members of the caucus talking about why they joined. And there's a lot of cynics out there that might suggest wrong reasons, but the reasons that they talked about were genuine and were very heartwarming. It was lovely to hear these types of words coming out of Congress. So how do we build political will and invigorate our democracy at the same time? So as we mentioned, JV Terra is the champion, but we do all meet with our members of Congress. And your representative here is Rick Larson. And there's a guy named John Whitmer, who's a nice friend of mine, who is the liaison for Citizens Climate Lobby with Rick Larson. And from what I could tell from John, he's a very steady guy. And I think he's had lots and lots of meetings with Rick Larson. And he told me that Rick Larson needs to hear from somebody else. And so one of the pieces of paper on your chair is actually a letter that all of you guys can write to Rick Larson. And then if you just leave them on the table where you signed in, I will mail them all to him so that he knows that it's not just John out there who wants him to support Citizens Climate Lobby's proposal. Oh, also, just to let you know too, there's going to be 1,300 of us that are going to Washington, D.C. to lobby this summer, and the dates are from June, I think it's 9th, it's on our website. And we don't have anybody from Rick Larson's district that's going to Washington, D.C. yet. And it's super fun, it's really a great conference. So if anybody wants to get really a lot of information about climate and a lot of enthusiasm, that's a good place to go. We do have a lot of published media as well. Staffers in Congress tell us that they assign one person on every congressman's team to look at the media and identify all media pieces that include the name of that particular lawmaker. So they do notice when you write letters, especially if you include the names of lawmakers in the letters that you submit. And as you can see, Citizens Climate Lobby has gotten a lot of media attention. There was a little bit of a downward trend in 2016 because of the election. That took a lot of media time, but then we came roaring back in 2017. So we were very successful. The next way we get things done is outreach. So that would be meetings like the one we're having here tonight. And these are super important. I mean, I am working on my optimism and all, but this is a huge job, okay? We're trying to get serious climate legislation passed in the United States Congress. So we need you guys. We need all the help we can get. And I think that you guys are, from what I've learned, you guys have more solar panels connected to the grid per capita than any other community in the whole country. A higher percentage of electric cars than anybody else in the whole country. And I also read that you guys are the healthiest county in Washington State. Yes, so we need you. We need your help. So I told you about my lifestyle changes, and my diet and my exercise and my music, they help me feel better. But I definitely did not want to feel like I'm working on this climate problem alone. So in 2014, when I heard about Citizens Climate Lobby, I was excited to start my own group. And this is a picture of my group on St. Patrick's Day in my backyard. And I love these people. They come to my house once a month, and they do a lot. I mean, we work on Citizens Climate Lobby things, but we also work on state and city-wide initiatives. And I could tell you stories about every person in this group and the kind of passion that they have and the other outside interests that they have that are all helping the world. So it's a good group of friends to have. So not one person here can do everything, but everyone can do something. And the picture on the left, that's my youngest daughter, and she lives in Seattle without a car, and she is very close to zero waste, and she also is vegan. And the other picture is my husband, who helps me a great deal, which is why I can get stuff done. And that's him with our brand new electric car, Nissan Leaf, that we drove here. And we made it. We're really excited about that. So this is what David Bernstein in the New York Times said about Citizens Climate Lobby. One day, ideally in the not too distant future, when Congress finally passes major legislation to curb carbon emissions, to reduce the environmental and economic harm caused by climate change, Americans will owe a big thank you to the perseverance and discipline of the Citizens Climate Lobby. So I hope you'll join us, and I would like to tell you a little bit more about the papers on your chair. And first, I would like to tell you what's not on your chair. There is no envelope asking you for money. We don't want your money. We want your work, your skills, your passion, your assistance. So the small piece of paper that's white is actually a link to the Wednesday introductory call. And I hope you will all listen to that call and find out more about Citizens Climate Lobby and how you can help our effort. And exactly, the little white one, perfect. Then there's another one that says, take a breath of fresh air. It's a postcard. And my daughter and I made that postcard, and it has links on it. If you didn't, yeah, you want to hold that one up? Yeah, it has links on it, thank you. And the links will help you feel more optimistic about climate change. There's like videos made by children, and there's videos about the energy disruptions that are coming by Tony Seba. It's a great video. And so there's lots of good things that's just for your internet browsing pleasure, that's all. So I think that together we can accomplish a lot more, and I hope you'll join us. And if anybody wants to start a chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby here on San Juan Island, I would be happy to help you start the chapter. There's already a lot of people that have signed up on Lopez Island, Orcas Island, and San Juan Island. All they need is a leader. So, thank you. That's it. Oh, that's not it. I have one more thing I wanted to share with you. Today, my husband and I had a lovely run, and we went to the sculpture garden, the San Juan Island Sculpture Park, I believe it's called, and I read a poem there by D.M. Jenkins, and I wanted to share it with you. It's called, I can even do it without glasses. It's called Against the Night. Always hold a dream, and when it burns dim, light another, and yet another, until you die or become a torch. So, and that's it. Thank you. Oh, I want to give, yeah.
You want to swing me for a minute just in case anyone has any questions?
Yeah, sure. Okay, sure.
Questions, anybody?
Oh, yeah, sure.
I'm curious about your vegan option. Can you
Yeah.
explain that?
The vegan? Yeah. So a lot of emissions that we cause are from what we eat, and that is especially true of beef, because the energy required to feed the cows, the land that's that's deforested to feed the cows, and the water needed to grow the crops that go to feed the cows, all of that takes a tremendous amount of energy. So for that reason, beef would be the #1 thing to decrease if you want to decrease your own personal carbon footprint. But other animal products also cause a lot of emissions. So by taking as many of those out as possible of your diet, you will help decrease your carbon footprint. And the nice coincidence too is that it's a much healthier diet. The only solution that's ever been shown to reverse hardening of the arteries is a very strict diet with only plant products. There's no other solution. If you have bypass surgery, they'll take out this much here, this much there, but they can't get all over your body with a bypass. It would be a dreadful operation. So, yeah. But, did that answer your question?
Sort of.
What?
I'm curious about, I understand you're talking about in terms of industrial agriculture and things like that.
Yes.
But in terms of San Juan Island, for instance, where there's certain grazing practices and water usage and things like that, how do you view animals in that way?
Okay, that's a great question too. So in the book, Paul Hawkins' book, they do talk about that. And if you have, if the cows, if you do, I'm not an expert on this by any means, but if there are cows that are moved from one area to another, sort of mimicking the migration patterns of the animals that used to live in the United States all over, that's actually good for the soil, and it can cause more carbon sequestration and make the soil healthier and able to grow more things. So that is good. And also sometimes if you have some cows along with agriculture, the cows can actually increase the productivity of the land. So, so in limited amounts like that, it can be helpful to the soil, and that's true. The trouble is though that like if everybody on the planet starts to wish for for grass-fed beef. There's just not enough land on the planet to provide grass-fed beef for everybody. And then the other problem is that the health ramifications we see from beef do not go away when your beef is grass-fed. So, is that better?
Thank you.
Okay, sure. Any other questions? Yes?
None of this stuff is ever going to happen until we get rid of the monsters who are currently running the government. Do you have any plans for that or any suggestions?
So we want to be ready. Like right now, the situation is pretty much chaos. And so I think if you're in a chaotic situation, then unexpected things can happen. And so we want to have people standing by that know exactly what they want to push through. And we want it to happen as soon as possible, either in chaos or in the brilliant future that we're going to have soon. So we'll see. Yes?
I have a question from online.
Okay.
Could the carbon tax revenue be used more efficiently and effectively if it were spent on clean energy infrastructure that replaces high carbon generating systems? The person said that they were worried about people getting a dividend and then using that to buy an expensive gasoline or diesel-powered truck.
Okay. I am so glad that question came up. Thank you to that person. So that's a great question. A lot of times, a carbon tax is a brand new revenue stream. And there's lots of good ways to spend new revenue streams. And certainly clean energy, we can all get behind that, right? But that's not what we propose. And the reason it's not what we propose is basically comes back to your question, sir, because we want this solution to be enacted sooner instead of later. And we want it to be durable. So for that reason, it has to be bipartisan. It has to appeal to Republicans. It has to appeal to Democrats. So the other thing, too, is that the price signal is very strong. You don't need a government program to promote solar and wind when they're already cheaper. People are getting rich off of them by starting new businesses, and the people are employing lots of people. I mean, you don't have to have a government program to do it if the economy is already making it favorable. So I think getting rid of fossil fuel subsidies would be important, and then imposing a tax on carbon is important. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Excellent. Thank you so much.
All right, so we've covered the federal level. Now let's take it down a notch to the state level. And Sarah Severn is going to come up and join us and tell us about the initiative 1631. That's the statewide initiative for clean air and clean energy that you have probably, when you walked in, saw a petition for. She'll tell you a little bit more about that. But to tell you a little bit more about Sarah, she moved to San Juan Island in 2014, but she told me she fell in love with it here in 1995, so she's loved it for a while, and it's wonderful to have you here. You're just an awesome member of our community doing some wonderful climate action. But just so you know where she came from, she was the global director of the environmental action team at Nike before she came here, so worked with some really important business as far as climate action goes and sustainability goes. So that's what her, at least some of her background is. She currently is an advisor for the Washington Business for Climate Action. So again, has that piece of what we need to do with businesses as far as climate action goes. So she's a wonderful resource for our community, but a wonderful resource for our planet too. So again, thank you for being here. And I'll let you tell everyone else about the other things that are going on. Mm-hmm. Here's your microphone.
Do I need this? I need this. Okay, this is where you realize you didn't wear the right clothes to clip things onto. That often happens. So, yeah, a little bit more about me. I was at Nike for over 20 years, and one of the things that I did very early on, actually the same year I fell in love with this island, was to start working on climate change for them. And we had there's a very long story, and it's subject for another day, but that's kind of where I cut my teeth. So I've seen this I've watched the trajectory of the conversation on climate change, even from the late 80s when I was in the UK and the Netherlands, where people were accepting it. There wasn't really any political division, and then all of a sudden, unfortunately, due to a kind of belief by certain, actually I read recently Frank Luntz, if anyone knows who that is, he's a pollster. He actually found out that the best way to combat this sort of move to address climate change was to sow the seeds of uncertainty and to say that the science was uncertain, and so began our challenge. So back in 2008, when I was still at Nike, we helped to set up this group called Business for Innovative Climate and Energy Policy, or BICEP. And that was an attempt to get the business community to do more advocacy to address climate change at a federal level. So I worked at that level. And then when I moved up here in 2014, I got asked to do this work at a state level. And in so doing, got involved with a group called the Alliance for Jobs and Clean Energy. And they have pulled together now a broader coalition, which includes the tribes, it includes the Nature Conservancy, and they have pulled together this initiative, which is 1631. And as Katie said, we've got petitions out there, we have lots of them, so we'd love to see people sign. How many of you have already signed? Oh gosh. So, you know, we come away from the event, we go, oh, well, we only got 5 signatures. That's because everybody had already signed. So hopefully this will give you a little bit more information about what you signed up for and what we can get on the ballot. And oh, one other thing to say, yes, I'm also, you know, big on the plant-based diet and drive an EV and all that good stuff. You can't really not do that. So basically, what 1631 is attempting to do is really put a focus on health and combating pollution. They've done a lot of work and a lot of polling, and they found that that's the thing that resonates most with the public. And Gwen led off with that. I mean, she talked about pollution and the fact that there's no safe level of particulates. And so a lot of this is about, it's not just the climate change, it's about the pollution too. What is different about it from the approach at the national level that CCL is doing is that it is going to put a fee on carbon, but it also intends to reinvest that money instead of handing it back to you and I to go and spend on possibly frivolous things in some cases. Although I'm sure most people could use extra money to kind of deal with the necessities. But the fact is, if you take the money and you invest it actually in solution sets, you get a steeper reduction curve. And that's also important because the price doesn't start at quite the same level as Citizens Climate Lobby. And the other important thing is job creation. They estimate at least 40,000 jobs in the state would be created through this program. So the idea is that you put a fee on the largest corporate polluters, and in that way it's not dissimilar to what Gwen was talking about. It would be at the level of things like imported fuel and kind of at the wellhead, except we don't have any wells here, but refineries and plants. And then the investments, as I said, would be put into reducing pollution. And the way the money would be spread out, 70% of it would go to clean air and clean energy investments. So that's everything from solar and wind, which are the sort of the usual suspects, to energy efficiency programs, transit, helping with electric vehicles. But more importantly, and one that gets overlooked a lot, is what Paul Hawken talks about a lot in Drawdown, is how we use land to sequester carbon and how we use our forests and our agriculture. And so a lot of it would be invested in those. 25% of the revenue would go to very specifically for water and forests and helping with increase what we call resiliency, particularly as we've seen more wildfires in the state. We've seen problems with access to water in terms of water shortages. when we've had droughts in eastern Washington, which was actually only a couple of years ago. It's hard to believe that now with the amount of rain we've been getting, but that is something that parts of the state are very vulnerable to. And then 5% of it goes into what they're calling the Healthy Communities Investment, which is helping really prepare some of the communities that are most challenged. And they've started to do surveys to show where those are and build community capacity and their ability to advocate. In terms of protecting those most impacted, there was a lot of discussion. I don't know if any of you remember Initiative 732. That was the state attempt to do a revenue neutral approach, where the money would go back to reduce sales tax rather than as a dividend. It was going to reduce the sales tax and would have been more equitable. But there was a sense from this coalition that it didn't do enough to really focus in on those most impacted communities and vulnerable communities. And so there are efforts in this initiative to really address that. And so this is why they have these sort of overlays of 35% of investments will actually benefit those areas that are most affected currently by pollution and climate impacts. And 10% has to be directly invested there. And also 10% of the investments have to have tribal nation support. And these are the kind of things that you get into when you have a big alliance like this, where everybody wants to get, you know, their own issues dealt with. And so there's been a lot of compromise, and it took probably a whole year to really craft this initiative in a way that everybody can support. And I think, you know, we're trying to reduce energy cost burden on people with lower incomes, so all of that goes. And importantly, and this was critical to get labour support, was that there would be investment in what they call a just transition. So if fossil fuel workers lose their jobs, there will be a fund that helps to support them with replacement of healthcare and benefits and income and training. The fee is paid by polluters, and it's the largest polluters, like the oil industry. The oil industry is obviously the number one, since 50% of our emissions in this state come from vehicle emissions. And there is some protection given to trade-exposed industries. Now, Gwen talked about border adjustments. This is a way to deal with that problem. By giving incentives or exemptions to those that might be disadvantaged because other countries could, for instance, if we put a price on steel, on the carbon emitted by manufacturing steel, and it puts the price up, it gives them a disadvantage against competition from perhaps China. So there's been some exemptions for that. And then there's governance, which is really important. So there's a public oversight board, and then there's 3 advisory panels for each of those 3 areas of investment. And they have a particular makeup of citizens. And then there'll be tribal consultation, as I mentioned, and reporting on effectiveness. So they'll do, I think it's every 4 years, they have to do a full report on how effective all this has been. So this is the campaign plan. We have to collect 260,000 signatures over a total period of 12 weeks, which is actually a huge task. And there's a reason, you know, we had to wait till we had the ballot title and before we could get out there and collect signatures. In effect, we actually will be collecting over 300,000 because we have to make sure, you know, many of the signatures prove not to be valid. And then we have to talk to swing voters in the state and really get support there and help people understand how this could potentially work. And then we have to get people out to vote. That is going to be the most important thing. So if any of you are interested, and I know we already have a few people in here who are volunteering. We've got Carol and Alison and Katie. I think you've all been doing some signature gathering. One, we need your signature, first of all. Secondly, if any of you want to gather signatures, and it doesn't matter, even 5 would be great. If that's all you do, because if everybody does, you know, just a few, then we can get our numbers. And if you really want to get involved and go out there and like us, go and get signatures, you can sign up as a volunteer. And it's really easy. They make it so easy for you. And people have been wonderful. It's a great way to meet people too. And we have the ferry lines, which work particularly well for gathering signatures here. And you can sign up for shifts, and there's lots of events put up there. So that is the summary of basically 1631 in a nutshell, which is, and I had to read through all 101 pages of the initiative to really fully understand it, because I've had to summarize it for a business audience as well. And it makes me realize why I'm not in politics. So, any questions? Yeah.
I've heard that the coal generation plants, like the one in Centralia, are exempted from the climate fee. Is that true?
It is true to the extent that they already have a plan in place, that they have agreed to phase out usage of coal or they're shutting coal plants down, like the Transalta coal plant, which will be shuttered, I believe, by 2025. So they've therefore given them leave on that. That's my understanding. It isn't that they've just said, oh no, we're not going to count you. So they already had tough negotiations with them, and I think that would have been the straw that broke the camel's back. So.
And another question: what's the fee schedule?
The fee schedule is, it starts at 15, and it raises $2 a year after that. And the goal is, we have some targets that are actually statutory targets, which are not yet good enough to meet. They're probably not far off the Paris climate goals, but they're not good enough to get us to the 1.5 degrees that the science is telling us. So the Department of Ecology is making recommendations to actually toughen those up. But the idea is that they will evaluate, and they'll cap the price at such point in time when we've reached those targets. And if we haven't, they'll just keep increasing it through to 2035. You've got a question. Oh, right.
If the CCL is successful and the federal legislation is passed, what will happen with 1631, assuming it also passes?
That's a very good question. I don't have a full answer to that, but what I would imagine is, it depends whether the state's legislation is considered to be primary to federal action. And I think what would happen, you wouldn't get taxes applied twice, clearly. So there'd have to be some sort of exemption for the state for people that were already paying taxes. That's my guess. If anyone else has a better answer on how these things all mesh together, because the same issue is going to be true of RGGI, the system over in the east, where they've got many states that have had a cap and trade system in place, and also California that has a cap and trade scheme. So all of those different schemes will have to somehow be aligned.
And also, it is possible that you could have both of them. And that's what they have in Scandinavia. They have multiple different taxes. And because the scope of the problem is so large, that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So the fee, pollution fee would be levied on fossil fuels that enter fossil fuels that enter our state through
Well,
pipelines and railroads and ships and that sort of thing.
Well, ships and exempt, and actually fuel used for agriculture specifically is also exempt. It's mainly, you know, oil refineries would be a big one, and so the question then, obviously, that people ask is, does that mean my price of my gas is going to go up? If they choose to pass the price on, yes, potentially, but it's probably in the range of 10 to 15 cents a gallon. And in the big picture, if you think about what the money that you pay for your gas currently, most of it goes out of state, and it goes into the coffers of the oil companies, and it doesn't have any benefit, whereas this fee would have benefit directly in state, because all the actions have to be taken in state and all the investments have to be made in state. That's one of the requirements. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So our next speaker, Lovel Pratt, is going to bring it down to the local level and talk about the next comprehensive plan update that our county is going through right now. I should say San Juan County is going through right now. Lovel is my co-worker at Friends now since January. She's our Marine Protection Program Director, and we're really excited to have her officially with us. She's been doing consulting for a number of years, marine and environmental consulting, and so it's just, yeah, again, thank you for all that work you're doing. But she was also on our county council in 2008 and served a term, and so she has some, unique experience with how these kind of things work, and I really appreciate you being here tonight to tell us more about it and how we can all get involved.
Thanks, Katie. All right, well, thank you all for being here, and I'm just going to do a very brief presentation. There's a little bit more. Okay, so San Juan County is just embarking on the process of updating its comprehensive plan, and this is required by state law. It's a 20-year planning tool. It's not a regulatory process in that sense. It's mostly goals and policies, but it is an opportunity for us to set a pathway to enact regulations that would address climate change issues in our community locally. And so what I have up here on the slide is, first of all, there's a website that has links to all the information about the comprehensive plan update on the county website. And then this is a timeline of where we're at in the process. And what just took place on Friday, the Planning Commission met and they adopted recommendations for the update to the vision statement. And now the vision statement is a very short document, just a couple of pages, but it addresses a wide range of topics. And for the first time, we now have a section in the vision statement that specifically addresses climate change. But one thing that we've been advocating for at Friends of the San Juans and the Islands Climate Resilience Group is to have climate change addressed throughout the comprehensive plan, not make it an isolated standalone element, but really address it everywhere in the plan. So this is just the first step. The Planning Commission is an appointed body, and they make recommendations to the San Juan County Council. So there's still opportunity for the council to amend what's recommended by the Planning Commission in any way they decide. But it is great to see, at least at the Planning Commission level, they did see the value of addressing climate change in the vision statement. But then the real work will come when we address the different elements or sections of the comprehensive plan. And obviously climate change is significant in some of them. Is this a pointer here? Yes. Okay, great.
Go down. Press the down.
Oh, yeah. So this right here is a list of the different elements of the comprehensive plan that we're going to be working on in the update. And like I said, they're just starting with the vision statement. But there's the section on land use. And in land use, they talk about rural and resource lands, and they talk about our resource lands, our agricultural and our forest resource lands. And of course, there's areas like we've heard tonight about carbon sequestration and the value that forest lands and agricultural lands can contribute in that way. And so those are values there. in the element underwater, there was if anybody listened to or was attending the Planning Commission meeting or listened to the meeting, they had a long discussion on water resources. And I think there were a lot of concerns, there are a lot of concerns in the community about our water resources. Here in the islands, we don't have a snowpack, we don't have a river system that provides us with our water. We depend upon our aquifer recharge, and it's limited. And so there's a lot of concerns. And with climate change, we're gonna have to be able to adapt to longer, hotter summers. And of course, summertime is our peak tourism time. It's our peak time when all the people who own second homes here come to visit. So demands on water significantly increase in the summer when we don't have any rainfall, we don't have any aquifer recharge going on. People are experiencing their wells drying out. And so this is something that's a real concern right now, but moving into the future, it's even gonna become more of a concern in terms of having to adapt to the climate change and the demands on water use. So that's an element that would be significant in terms of making sure that we address climate change issues. So there's other areas, housing and transportation. Obviously transportation, to look at ways that we can improve on different transportation options and public transportation here. And housing, there's a lot of conversation in the community right now about affordable housing. We all know that it's a real issue. One way that we can reduce the cost of housing and also reduce our carbon footprint is by having programs that invest in reducing energy use of our homes, retrofitting homes so that they're more efficient. But then also the programs like OPALCO sponsors in terms of renewable energy generation. And there's opportunities there for reducing our housing costs that way. So there is, as you entered the room where all the petitions are, there is a petition that Friends of the San Juans has out that you can sign with regard to addressing climate change and the comprehensive plan update. And so just so you know about that. But any questions? And I know there are groups on the other islands. There's other groups that are getting engaged in this issue, and it's a good opportunity to work on this issue. All right, thank you. Oh.
I'll just share. I'm in Bellingham, and Whatcom County last year did their comprehensive plan update and established a goal of the community reaching 100% renewable energy, and then they created a committee and said, go figure out how fast we can do it and come up with a plan to get there. So there's definitely precedent for that sort of policy.
Great. Yeah, that's great. Good. Tom.
Lovel, the county invests their money in various places, right? And there was a time when they had the investments in some fossil fuel companies. They've divested from those, haven't they, as far as you know?
I don't know what the current investments are. Jurisdictions are very restricted in terms of how they can invest their money and where they can invest their money, but I don't know where that's currently at. Yeah. Anybody else? Well, thank you guys for coming. And Katie, you're going to have some closing remarks. Oh.
As far as creating a better environment, would the county be considering maybe creating more bicycle paths and getting less cars off the road? And would this be the right way for that?
Absolutely. So there is, I think that's definitely something to advocate for in terms of the transportation element of the comprehensive plan. And there are ways that the county is looking at more pedestrian trails and bike trails for sure, but I think that would be great, yeah. All right, thank you.
All right, so that wraps it up for the most part. I hope that you have some more ideas now about what's going on and what, again, what you can be involved with. And really, in this community right now, just all of those ideas, for the comprehensive plan, that's something on the local level that we can play a big role in, and then of course feed up into these other pieces we talked about today too. I'm just curious, are there any elected officials in the room tonight? How about any, well, we also have ideas now, right, for what to go forth and talk to our elected officials about. So please make sure you do that. That's your homework assignment after this. But how about any candidates? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Alex Ramel. I'm running for the state representative position that Chris Litton is retiring from in the 4th district.
Okay. And yeah, thanks for being here, Alex. And if anyone wants to hear more from Alex about his ideas for all of this and where he stands, there'll be an informational, campaign kickoff tomorrow at Brickworks starting at 2:30. So if you want to hear more from Alex about that and ask him the tough questions about what he would do if he was in our state government. And that, yeah, about right?
Let's do the tough questions one-on-one.
Yes, sure, absolutely. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so you can meet him tonight if you'd like to as well. So any other questions, comments before we go on with your weekend? All right, well, thank you again. And there are lots of petitions out there, lots of things to sign. I have a lot of 1631 packets, thanks to Carol Kibble and Sarah Severn in my office right now at Friends of the San Juans. If anybody wants to come grab as many of those as possible,